The little boy stood frozen on the narrow gravel shoulder as the wind pushed dust around his ankles and the distant motorcycle thunder grew stronger with each passing second, creating a deep vibration in the air that made his chest flutter with fear, and yet he kept his arms lifted in that desperate rescue signal because something ahead on the road shimmered with a danger he could not explain, and the strange glow made him step backward as he wondered if the rider would understand what he was trying to warn him about, or if the man would simply speed past and vanish into the bend while the threat waited silently beyond the curve. High felt the silence around him tighten like a rope as the distant howl of the engine came closer, and he kept seeing flashes of light bouncing off the hidden hazard that had made him panic in the first place, and he remembered how moments earlier he had been kicking a pebble along the edge of the road when he heard the crackling sound and saw a burst of sparks dancing across the asphalt like tiny stars falling to the ground. So he knew something terrible was lying just beyond sight, and he sensed that the rider had no idea what he was racing toward, leaving him unsure if he could save a stranger before the unseen danger struck. The motorcycle appeared around the far end of the straightaway, its chrome catching the afternoon sun and throwing sharp reflections across the boy's eyes, but he did not lower his arms as the rider leaned forward, gripping the handlebars tightly with his long hair whipping behind him and the hot wind, and the boy could feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Because if he failed to warn the man, then the disaster ahead would unfold in front of him, and he would have to live knowing he did nothing while the hidden sparks continued to hiss and pulse as though waiting to lash out when the machine came near. Dust lifted around the tires as the rider accelerated, unaware of the flickering streak of electricity lying across the road just beyond the curve, and the boy's heartbeat pounded louder than the motorcycle because he knew that once the man reached that point, the metal frame of the bike would touch the live wire, and the explosion of energy would throw the rider into the air, and the boy pictured the aftermath and felt a wave of dread sweep over him even as his arms began to ache from holding them high, but he refused to lower them because the rider still had time to slow down if only he saw the signal before it was too late. The boy shouted, though the wind tore his voice away and scattered it across the valley, leaving only a faint echo drifting toward the rider, who remained focused on the road ahead, while the curve approached like a trap tightening around its prey, and the boy stepped forward again, trying to plant himself directly in the line of sight of the roaring machine, hoping the man would react quickly once he noticed the small figure standing in the middle of nowhere and offering a warning that carried far more urgency than the rider could possibly imagine at that moment. The air thickened as the motorcycle closed the distance, and the boy felt the gravel shift under his shoes while his mind raced through memories of the stories his grandfather used to tell him about how sometimes danger hid in the simplest places, waiting for the right moment to strike, and he thought about how strange it was that he happened to be walking here today when the wire fell from the power pole and landed across the asphalt, sending sparks skittering like angry insects, and he wondered if this was some kind of test or if he had simply been in the wrong place at the right time, leaving him unsure of why fate had placed him there at all. He looked again at the curve ahead, where the sunlight flickered in irregular pulses as the live wire twitched in the faint breeze, and he imagined the sound the rider would hear if he hit it, the snap, the crack, the roar of electricity colliding with steel and rubber and leather, and he knew those sounds would echo in his mind forever if he failed to stop the man in time. So he steadied himself and shouted again, hoping that this time even a shred of his voice might carry through the rush of wind and engine noise. The motorcycle finally began to slow, almost imperceptibly, but enough for the boy to notice, and his heart leaped as the rider straightened slightly and tilted his head in a way that suggested he had finally seen the small figure waving frantically on the side of the road. Yet the bike was still moving too fast, and the boy felt panic clawing at his throat, because if the rider did not brake hard enough, then he would still reach the curve too soon, and the danger would engulf him just as violently as if he had not slowed at all. The rider raised one hand as if to question the boy, and the gesture brought a flicker of hope to the child's mind, because it meant the man was paying attention now. But the motorcycle continued forward with a momentum that felt unstoppable, and the boy recognized that he would have only a few seconds to convince this stranger to stop completely before the curve swallowed him and the shimmering hazard beyond it delivered its deadly strike, and he felt time thinning around him like stretched fabric, threatening to tear. His legs trembled, but he ran into the center of the lane, waving his arms back and forth as wildly as he could while the engine roared closer, the vibrations shaking his bones as the front tire carved a straight line toward him. And he saw the rider's eyes widen with shock as the man realized that this was not a simple greeting but a desperate plea, and the boy prayed silently that the rider would not misjudge the distance or the urgency, because every inch mattered, and the wire continued to pulse with electric hunger just beyond the bend. The motorcycle jerked violently as the rider slammed on the brakes, sending a cloud of dust into the air, while the tires screamed against the gravel and the boy stood firm with his arms still raised as if frozen in that final warning motion, and he could feel the heat of the engine as the bike skidded across the road, coming closer with frightening speed while the rider's boots scraped against the ground in an attempt to steady the machine, though it seemed uncertain whether the skid would end in time or continue past him into the curve, where the unseen danger waited like a silent predator, and in the final moment before the bike reached him, the boy wondered if he had reacted too late, and if the man would crash through him and into the deadly spark beyond, leaving him powerless to stop the chain of events he had tried so hard to prevent, as the sound of metal grinding against gravel rose around him in a deafening roar that made him squeeze his eyes shut, unsure of what he would see when he opened them again, as the scene hung suspended in fragile uncertainty, waiting to reveal what would happen next to Hell's Angel steadied his breath as the dust settled around him, and the little boy pointed with shaking hands toward the fallen power line that still sparked weakly across the curve, and the rider felt a chill crawl along his spine as he realized how close he had come to charging straight into its deadly current, and he looked back at the boy with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude, while the valley around them hummed with an uneasy silence that hinted something deeper was stirring beneath the surface. He lifted the boy onto the bike seat for safety, then crouched low to inspect the line without touching it, and he saw the scorch marks spreading slowly along the road as though the wire had been burning its way into the gravel, and he sensed that the danger was not ending but growing, and he wondered who else might be traveling this empty highway, unaware that a silent threat was waiting for them just beyond the next turn, as the heat from the wire radiated outward in slow, powerful waves. Boy tugged at his jacket and whispered that he had heard another strange sound before the rider arrived, a low rumble, like something shifting deep under the ground, and the man listened closely as the breeze paused and a faint tremor vibrated through the soles of his boots, and he felt the earth beneath them respond with a lurking energy that did not feel natural, and he wondered if the fallen wire was only the beginning of a chain of events none of them were prepared to face, as the tremor grew and faded like a sleeping giant. Drawing breath, he decided they needed to get help before the situation spiraled, and he swung himself back onto the motorcycle with the boy holding tightly in front of him, but as he turned the throttle the ground quivered again, more sharply this time, and a shower of dust spilled from the cliffs above the road, as though the valley itself were warning them that time was slipping away, and he knew they had to move fast. Yet he looked back toward the sparking wire, and felt torn, because leaving it behind meant someone else might stumble into its trap without the same warning he had received. The boy tapped his shoulder and pointed toward the far end of the valley, where a thin column of smoke rose into the sky, twisting slowly, as if being pulled upward by an unseen force, and the sight sent a wave of unease through the rider, because the smoke was not coming from any house or fire he recognized, and its steady ascent felt unnatural, almost deliberate, as though it was signaling something to the distant hills beyond the valley, and he felt a strange pressure settle on his chest as if urging him to move, but also to stay and investigate what the smoke was hiding. He revved the engine but did not release the clutch as he weighed the choice before him, and the rumble beneath the ground deepened with a slow drawn-out groan that seemed to echo from the canyon walls around them, and for a moment he imagined the entire landscape shifting under their feet, and he wondered what force was awakening in this quiet, forgotten place. As the boy clung to his jacket,